All right, good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock, and so I'd like to go ahead and get started, stay on time here. Everybody's got busy, and once we get through this, to go on through the rest of your day. So my name's Chris McComb, the village manager, and to my right is Zach Hewitt, our finance director, joining me, along with the mayor and Jenny. We do have a couple of our council members joining us remotely that can't be here with us in person. I think Scott Gardner and Emily Hill are with us. I do also want to acknowledge the village has its consultants, our coastal engineer, Eric Olson, and our financial consultants, David Cheatwood and Chazo Habliston, and bond counsel, Brandon Lofton. They're joining us as well, so that once we get to the question and answer portion of the session, if there's any specific questions that are technical in nature that I feel I can't answer specifically, I may ask them to provide some support there. I think the objective here is to offer an opportunity for questions and try to do our best to answer those with the factual relevant details of the project in all aspects today. This is the second informational session. We had one back on December 11th. Some of you may have attended that or watched that. We have a web page on our village website that is solely dedicated to this project that has all this information on it, everything that we've worked on for almost the last 2 years on this project for your information to review at any point in time. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started. There we go. All right, so the discussion topics for this morning, we're going to dive into the history, purpose, the need, and the scope of the project again. And this is in regards to the March 5th, 2024 GEO bond referenda that's on the ballot that everyone should be aware of by now. Zach, at some point as we go through this presentation, I will transition to him to talk through the various scenarios of funding and potential tax implications. And then we'll finish it up. We'll wrap it up with the project timeline and then the Q&A. For those of you that did see the December presentation, this one is really a pared down version of that. That last one we did in December, I think it took us over an hour and 15 minutes to get through that. So we really want to provide opportunity for Q&A this go around. All right. So I want to touch on the highlights when we talk about the history of our shoreline management program, what we do and how we do it, and the way we've been doing it for more or less the last 20 plus years, as to recognize that there's probably a lot of property owners that are new or haven't been here with the village through the last 20 years and don't know a lot of that history and what we've done. And so we want to acquaint those new property owners, and we also want to reacquaint some of the longtime property owners of what we do. As much has been invested in what we do and how we do it. Looking at the history in the pre-2000s, I think the impetus of our erosion problems began with the expansion of the Wilmington Harbor Navigation Channel, the federal shipping channel that goes up to the port in Wilmington. That shipping channel runs through Bald Head Island and Caswell Beach on the other side. And, back in 2000 and 2001, they deepened that shipping channel from 38 feet to the present day 42 feet deep. And they did a little bit of a realignment to it, as you can see, to orient yourself coming down the shipping channel around the S curve and then on out to sea. Former realignment went straight out. They, in 2001, shifted it over closer to the Bald Head Island side, running through that shoal feature. As part of that, the village, in recognizing through the work of Eric Olson, the negative effects of that deepening, and to some degree, what's the word I'm looking for? He envisioned, if you will, he predicted that this erosion would occur to the extent that it had, that we ended up, filing a lawsuit against the Corps of Engineers, and out of that came a settlement agreement. And it included what we refer to as a sand management plan. You'll hear that SMP, sand management plan. That set the stage for the cycles of how we get the sand on our shoreline when the Corps dredges the channel. It's based on a 6-year cycle, and they typically dredge that channel every 2 years. And on 2 out of those 3 cycles, Bald Head side gets that sand on its shoreline. On that 3rd cycle, it goes to the other side, Caswell Beach and Oak Island. And so what this chart shows you on the right here is just that, where the village got the sand in 2015. And then Oak Island got it in 2018. And then we did our own private project in 18-19. Then we recently got it in the channel sand in 21 and 23. And here we are planning again for our private project. At which point Oak Island will get the sand in 25, and then we're back due in 2027. So in essence, if we don't do our own private project in 25, the next opportunity for sand through the sand management plan will be 2027. I'd just like to show some visuals for some of those folks that may not recall what things looked like back in the 90s and the early 2000s with the erosion. With this one in particular, shows the Club Inn out there on the beach at the time it was succumbing to the erosion. This was in 2003. You can see the sandbag revetment wall here running along South Bald Head Wind, at which time there were still 2 bifurcated lanes running along that stretch. Present day, there's a single lane. This just shows some of the homes. These are the ones that are on the south side, the ocean side of South Bald Head Wind. This one in the lower corner, this is South Bald Head Wind, what you can see of it, and the club entrance is up here on the left or up here. And that's that sandbag revetment that's doing its best to protect that road. There was a time when folks moved houses off the beach. This one was in particular off Sandpiper Trail over to Horsemeat, where they positioned it on pilings that were put in the ground. These photos just show the erosion at the point nearest the navigation channel. Here's the first soft groin tube closest to the channel, where we installed a sandbag revetment, which is here. This is now in 2023. That sandbag revetment is buried here under that dune. (2000) to now, looking at 2009, this is when we started the dedication of property tax revenue specific to shoreline management. The council at the time believed that that was the most pressing issue for the long-term sustainability of the island, such that they put in place the tax revenues to fund shoreline protection, including the creation of the municipal service district zones A and B. And in 2010, that really was the village's first engineered project that was funded through a GO bond process that included $18 million to replace sand along South Beach and the 16 soft tube groins. As we continue through the years, the village had spent, funds throughout that period of time, putting in sandbag revetments, replacing groin tubes. And at some point, probably around 2010, we started working on the long-term strategy of the terminal groin structure. At that time, the state of North Carolina Division of Coastal Management did not permit those types. They called them hardened structures. In certain minds, folks envisioned hardening of a coastal shoreline to perhaps what folks might be familiar with along the coast up in the northern part of the East Coast. And the state of North Carolina was very aggressive in not wanting to see that happen. But at some point, we were successful in working with several other coastal municipalities of Ocean Isle Beach and Holden Beach and Figure 8 Island to lobby the North Carolina legislators to approve a terminal groin bill that allowed for 4 pilot projects, if you will. Out of those 4 today, Bald Head Island was the first one to install it in 2015-16. Ocean Isle Beach just installed theirs now probably just over 2 years ago. Ocean Isle Beach had to deal with some law litigation because certain folks didn't agree with putting those in. We were fortunate we didn't have to deal with that. The difference in us was people recognized that what we were doing was next to a major deep water federal navigation shipping channel. Unlike some of the other locations were nearest a recreation or shallow draft inlet that may be at most 12 feet deep or so, not 42 feet deep like what we have out there. So this visual just shows the before and after terminal groin, where this shoreline was, we were continuously fighting that erosion of that shoreline. You know, just to give you some perspective, when back then, when the channel was dredged and the sand was placed back, within a period of 12 to 16 months at best, a lot of that sand was going right back into the shipping channel. That's how quick it would erode. And not until we put in the terminal groin structure that starts back here and comes out 1,300 feet, you can barely see the tip of it there. But once we put that in, that really served to hold and stabilize that shoreline in that area. And just for clarity, that the terminal groin structure is not intended to stop erosion, it's intended to slow the erosion rate and process down. And that's what it effectively has done. So in 2015-16, we installed that terminal groin at a cost of $8 million. That was by way of a GO bond authorized amount to do that project. In addition, we did some other erosion mitigation projects. If you recall, up in the marina, the 2 breakwaters that you see along Rowboat Row, we took over the long-term maintenance of the Bald Head Island Marina Channel maintenance program from the developer. And when we did that, we extended the existing jetties and we put spurs on them. For those that have been around, you recall the days when Limited was out there almost weekly doing something to keep that channel clear of sand. Now we typically on average will dredge that about 3 times a year. And we were able to get a state grant to help fund that through the shallow draft inlet grant fund through the state of North Carolina. And then in 2018 and 19, we did our second private placement project. That the project plus the replacement of the groin tubes was around $13 million to do that. So here, just want to acknowledge that, you know, with the Wilmington Harbor channel maintenance and the sand management plan, those are federally funded projects at no cost to the village historically. But that results then on average, the amount of sand dredged from the channel reaching about 60% from west to east down South Beach. In 2020 and 2021, we did try to work closely with the Corps to get them to extend that as far down South Beach to the east to try to help get some sand down in the area at that eastern end. It got close, but the federal project again is it's on the dime of the federal, is a federal project, the federal government. So we have somewhat limited control of where exactly that sand goes and how much. It's all based on how much funding they get appropriated by Congress to do that project. But later at the end, we'll talk about more about that and some actions the village is working on at present to help with that. This slide in particular shows a table of beach disposal and sand placement activities going back to 1991 to 2023. Just to acknowledge what I just had went through with the village's initial engineered project here, our second project here, and the last two projects being core channel maintenance projects. In sum total, I've been here since this project in 2005, 12 projects I've been a part of with the core, whether they were a core project or a village privately funded project. This one coming up will be 13. This just shows that table graphically as to where that sand was placed along the South Beach shoreline. And whether it was a village project, a core sand management plan project, or in the case of this one here, a FEMA project. Because we qualified our project back in 2009 as an engineered beach, we have the ability, if a federal declared disaster storm comes through and it erodes our shoreline, we have the ability to put in for public assistance reimbursement funds to put that sand back. But we have to quantify that. And we do that with before storm surveys and after storm surveys. And Eric, our engineer, works through that to quantify the losses. We had that project, Hurricane Irene. We lost a couple 100,000-ish cubic yards of sand that the FEMA paid that we put back on the shoreline. Mayor, I think you had mentioned including this slide as it's a good sort of big picture slide to show. I mean, there's a lot of data, a lot of numbers and whatnot, but big picture from 2000 to 2023, this black line shows the sand placement projects and other projects, including the terminal groin construction project here. But over that period of time, the sand that's been placed on South Beach. And while there's been a lot of ups and downs, the key takeaway is the red arrow showing a net cumulative gain of about 2.6 million cubic yards of sand on South Beach. The blue line references West Beach, which has been pretty stable. And how we do this is we have an annual monitoring program where we survey the beach profiles, the shoreline in the spring and fall. For the fall and spring, and then Eric does the analysis of that data to show net accretion or erosion. There's periods of a shoreline that can be in an accreting state, just as there's other areas that can be in an erosional state. So that's what this shows. Let me go back to that just to make the point here too, that, without doing these projects in the manner that we do them as part of our long-term strategy, we wouldn't have this here. So just some more before and after photos. And this one in particular just shows back in 2005, this again is South Bald Head Wine in front of the club. Hurricane Charlie came through in the winter of '04 and took that road out. We came back and put in the single lane road. And then the Corps did that channel maintenance and pushed that sand and covered that dune. It's that sandbag revetment wall under here. And then, as you know, that just continued to flourish up to present day. Here's some before and after again of homes along South Beach. Back in '04, present day. Big healthy dune. Healthy, it's wide and tall, all about storm protection. Storm surge from tropical storms or hurricanes. Here's one further down. Here's another one. And just want to highlight, we have done some work on East Beach. For those that have been around, there was a period of time along a good portions of East Beach here where you really had a flat beach profile. Basically, you had no dune, and you know, you'd have some nor'easters and such that would come through, and storm surge would push up, wave run up and up into these structures here. Several times we had to do emergency dune pushes, which here basically take a bulldozer and go out from the normal low tide line, and with a 1 foot push, you push up that sand, then you come back and vegetate it. This is just a similar instance looking south of East Beach towards Frying Pan Shoal. So what have we learned? I think all these points are important when we talk about our shoreline management program, that engineered shoreline stabilization with structures and routine sand placement projects work. They protect public and private infrastructure, public infrastructure, water, sewer, roads. Property values and investments are maintained and protected. Bird nesting, turtle nesting areas are preserved and enhanced. In the case of the area at the Terminal Groin, there was never really any place for birds to nest. Now it's vibrant with piping plovers and least terns, which are threatened and endangered, and on occasion a turtle. And then, as I mentioned, having that engineered beach has us eligible for FEMA post-disaster funding to mitigate storm-induced damage. So looking at the 2025 plan as proposed, there's two sections, a section A and a section B. Here's a map that just shows that visually. Section A from the Terminal Groin, here's the Terminal Groin structure. But from approximately here, and I quantify these as approximate locations. They're subject to change with some variability depending on the most recent beach surveys of where the accretion or the erosion is occurring. And we're continuously working to refine this. We call it a fill template. It's really where the sand is going along the shoreline. But this is section A through the Terminal Groin and the soft fill groin tube to here, and then the section B, the eastern end, from here to the terminus at Cape Fear. So on the section A, we're looking at 500,000 cubic yards, and all the sand's coming from Jaybird Shoals, which is the borrow site that we've used. This will be the third time we've used that borrow site out in towards sort of in the middle of the shipping channel between Bald Head and Castle Beach. In addition to replacing sand in that stretch of shoreline, we will look to replace the 13 soft tube groins as well. And Zach will get into the cost and the payoff, but here in a second. Part of our requirement to do the Section A fill is based on our permit requirement to maintain sand within the terminal groin section and by way of our variance for the soft tube groin field. And all this is codified to some degree in the sand management plan. The Section B East End project is looking to put approximately 500,000 cubic yards from Jaybird Shoal in the area of approximately Flores Bluff and Kilgrave Ridge eastward to the point at Cape Fear. The reference to the federal grant, or I'll call it an earmark for 4.5 million, is still on the table. It's still within the bill for Congress to act on. It's just a matter of them doing so. The East End project and other village actions, if I go back and I talked a little bit about the Corps and the sand management plan and where they put the sand at the cost of the federal government. Just here within the last several weeks, we've had meetings that is an ongoing dialogue with the Corps to put in place the ability for the village at the village's cost for additional work where the Corps could place sand where we would like them, where the need is on South Beach in the form of a memorandum of agreement. And so we're working through that process to codify that so that in 2027, if we see there's a need based on the surveys and what the shoreline conditions are leading up to that, we would have that option in place if we so choose to do that. That'll be a future decision of council at the time. The other thing we're working on and have been is trying to get approval of the Frying Pan Shoal as our long-term borrow site. The Frying Pan Shoal features the feature that extends off Cape Fear, the point, some 30 miles out offshore, that is an infinite, unlimited supply of source that we believe is the long-term borrow site, because the Jaybird Shoal borrow site is limited. We believe that this is the last opportunity that we'll have to dredge that borrow site, and that's been told to us by the regulatory agencies as part of our permitting process. And then the last two bullets we're seeking, we will be working towards a potential goal or objective of some sort of a structure or a plan for that at the east end at the Cape Fear point. And that's a pretty arduous process that will take time and funding to model that. So those are things that I would say are on the table for the long-term sustainability of the eastern half of South Beach, all based on need. So at this point, I want to transition it to project funding and potential borrowings to have Zach talk through that. All yours, Zach.
Thanks, sir. So as you all are aware, we have two GEO bond referenda on the ballot in March. One for a $13.5 million GEO bond and the other for a $4.5 million GEO bond. And with those two referenda, we have three potential scenarios that we'd like to present to you all. Most of y'all have already seen these already. So scenario A would require the passing of referendum A. Scenario B would require both A and B. And then scenario C would require the passing of A, B, and then calling on a prior GEO bond that was previously approved. So referendum A, again, 13.5 million. That's at a 7-year term at an estimated 4.5%. The proposed GO bond debt service would begin when the current debt service ends in fiscal year 26. It's going to be structured so that the combined existing 2018 GO bond plus the new GO bond debt service would equal current levels. Current levels here at about $2.5 million each year, and it would remain at that level for the remaining 6 years. For referendum B, that includes the additional $4.5 million over a 7-year term at 4.5%. It would also begin in FY 26 and pick up where the existing debt service left off. And that would cause the debt service payback to increase to about $3.2 million, where it would remain for that at that level for the next 6 years. And then this is what we call the worst case scenario. If we had to call on an additional 2.2 million from the previously approved GO bond, same term, same rate, would begin the same time, and it would cause the debt service threshold to go up to 3.6 million. And again, it would stay that level for 6 years after it started in 26. And so this is a new chart that we were asked to include and basically show the different scenarios with and without the federal earmark in place. So along this side, you have bond amounts, and along the bottom, you have the potential bid amounts that could come in for the project. And as you see here, with a $4.5 million earmark, you can't do any projects, but just by itself, anything below or above $4.5 million. And as the bids go up here and you add in additional GO bond amounts, that increases the amount of project that you can do. So with the $13.5 million bond and the $4.5 million earmark, you could do projects up to $18 million in this area as your bids go up. And then if you had to add in that $2.2 million additional bond, you would be able to do projects up to $20.2 million. And anything above that amount, you can't do. That same scenario, but this time with the earmark removed, $13.5 million GO bond level here. You could do projects $13.5 million or less. And as you add in the additional bonds, that amount goes up that you can do. So what are the tax implications on the 3 scenarios? As we just said, in scenario A, tax rates would stay the same. So there would be no change based on current revenues and current debt service expenditures. For scenario B, with the additional $4.5 million, if the federal grant's approved, you will have no impact on property tax, little to no impact on property taxes, because you would still just be taking out that $13.5 million GO bond. If the grant is not approved and the village is approved to borrow the full 4.5 in addition to the 13.5, you would have possible tax implications. And right now those are estimated at 3.5% on the island-wide rate, and then both MSD zones would have to go up by 1.25. And what does that look like on the property tax bills? So just using an example of a home valued at $1.5 million, located in one of the MSD zones. You have the current tax rate here at 0.5779, and what that tax bill looks like, the proposed rate that it would go up to, and what that tax bill would look like. And if they were in the MSD zones, it would be a total of $713 on a $1.5 million home. So scenario C, if we're approved to borrow the full 18 million, that's the 2 GO bonds for 4.5 and 13.5. And we had to use the additional 2.2 million, you would see the rates go up from that 3.5 that we just talked about to 5.5 and 1.83 cents respectively. And same scenario, on a $1.5 million home. In the worst case scenario, you would see a tax bill increase of approximately $1,100.
Thanks, Zach. So just to round out the project schedule and where we're at, between the December public hearing that we were required to hold as part of the GO bond process and the March 5th referendum, as we work through the LGC Local Government Commission application submittal and decision or approval to finance the project, bidding the project out early summer, awarding the contract in the fall, beginning construction in January through completion in May of 2025. And this all started really back in 2022 during the council retreat discussing about this project. And then the timeline to the March 5th referendum, various dates that hopefully most folks know by now. We have, through our public information officer, have put this information out and will continue to do so that everybody has that, has those critical dates. And then the question posed, what happens if bonds are not approved? We'll just continue to monitor the beaches. Would have to look at temporary erosion control, mitigation strategies with sandbag revetments and such things that we've done in the past. So yeah, thank you for joining us again for the second session. And I think now the appropriate time to see if there's any questions or well, I think, at least from where I sit, Mayor, I'm here until I've tried my best to answer every question that's being posed today. That's my objective. So if anybody has any questions, comments, Bob?
I just a quick question. We talked about what taxes are gonna go up if we vote to do this project. How much is taxes, has the village looked at what taxes may go up if we don't do this project and we have collateral damage like sewers, like electrical, and like all these other things? I would assume our tax rate's gonna go up repairing all of that, because that's not claimed. Is that correct?
There's some assumptions there, but to say that we've done anything specific and in detail to quantify that potential, no, we have not.
So I think that it could be very expensive if we don't get it right. And we have a big storm come through, and we have to repair sewers. And
yeah,
electrical, that we just spent a lot of money.
Well, I would say to follow that, my initial thought or response to remember that one, our beach is an engineered beach. So if it's a natural disaster, it's a federal declared disaster, that FEMA will kick in with the public assistance process or program. And we've been pretty successful with previous storm events, whether it was putting sand back on the beach that was quantified as being lost, and or if we had to repair or replace infrastructure. As an example, Hurricane Isaias took out the dock at the Marina Park. We were able to get FEMA funds to replace that. So I would say, to some degree, you're right. I mean, there's going to be those associated costs due to the disaster, but I think there's ways that we can work to replace it. But to the extent, what is the actuarial cost once the dust settles, I can't say.
Excuse me, to clarify, I think you're talking about the west end of South Beach that's engineered, because the east end I don't think is considered engineered.
I might call on Eric to reaffirm my response that when we did the engineered beach, that we got the entire stretch of west and South Beach included, and possibly East Beach. Is that fair, Eric?
Not East Beach, but all of South Beach is included within the definition of your engineered beach.
Okay, thank you. Mayor?
I may have missed the first meeting I've come to, but has the committee looked carefully at putting a larger rock jetty somewhere down that way? The rock jetty on the end of West Beach has done fantastic. The
Right.
beach, we lost a lot of beach, but the rock jetty in, beach has come back and maybe wider than it was.
Yeah, Larry, so the village has been discussing that as an option, a potential option. I think it was on the last slide of other things the village is working as potential options, but of course, just like with the terminal groin structure, that took a number of years to work through the legislation, the engineering and design and modeling and permitting before we even constructed. In some total, plus or minus 5 years or so. But the other point there is right now that legislation that allowed for the terminal groin and the others that we would have, our understanding is we'd have to go back to the state to have legislation passed to allow us to do another, if you will, hardened structure. The soft tube groin field, those for additional clarity, the village got a variance through the Division of Coastal Management by the Coastal Resources Commission to put those in because those are technically not allowed either. The village did that back in 1996, and they've just continued to maintain that system over the course of time because it's of significant value also in slowing the movement of that sand from east to west back towards the channel. And so, but if that's been another option or strategy that's been put out there, that would require a variance to do that as well. But anything that's done, it's going to take time and effort to fully study and because we don't want there to be any negative effects of adjacent shorelines, whether that's, we're working to mitigate a problem on the south facing shoreline. Could that have negative effects on the east facing shoreline or the other way? So
Has Eric even been asked to do his good work, to look at that and make a recommendation?
only conceptually at the highest level, really, at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Larry, it is at the conceptual level, and those things are not allowed right now at all. And so we have Eric at a conceptual level, and we have our legislators and our lobbyists working at the federal level and at the state level to try and get approvals. At which point, Eric following through with it makes sense. Right now, we don't have an allowance to do that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, looking at this on a long-term basis. If the rock jetty concept would work, it may be worthwhile waiting and seeing how that turns out than spending millions of dollars on sand and it's going to go away in a couple of years or 3 years. It makes me question it.
Yeah. There's other variables or factors too that just like with the terminal groin at the west end, if we put a structure in, we've got to maintain the fill of that structure, which would require ongoing sand placement. But to your point, you're right. I mean, a structure possibly could slow that rate down like it slowed the rate at the other end. But it just all has to be modeled and studied in great detail. I'll get you, Ben.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. The first question is, some of us submitted questions.
Yeah.
Are we gonna be going through all those so that the people get the benefit of the answers?
So from the December 11th initial info session, I've got 14 pages back in front of questions that were submitted. We've responded to those. Those are on the website. From the BHA information session that was to occur, they received 5 questions, and we've responded to those as well, and those are on the website too. But if you want me to, I mean,
Well, I'm gonna re-ask my question.
okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Actually, before I do that, can I ask how many people are on the chat? We have 13 people.
And one question waiting, and we'll get to that one.
Part of my question was also related to longer term. And I want to state upfront, I am not making any assertions as to whether people should vote yay or nay. But what I'm trying to get at is, and it came about because of the first session, I had a question about the timeline for these solutions to be effective. And one of the issues was in the last session, the engineers came in and said, gave us a sense of how long that sand is going to be viable. Sounds like we've got a really wholesome program for the west end of the island, and we kind of know the timing, and we know we can exist from one to the next. Doesn't feel that way on the east end. And I'm asking that question because I'm trying to understand at what point do we recognize that additional sand is not the long-term answer, and maybe we need to seriously think about what is on that point. Next steps for how we utilize that end of our island. Do we retreat? Do we recognize that this is a natural barrier? And as I said, I'm not suggesting one way or the other right now, but I'm concerned that this could go on for another cycle. And at what point do we say we need to do something different? Because my impression after that first meeting, when engineers answered the question, was that this is a 2-year plus solution on the east end. And that's a sense of urgency for us to do something different. So I want to put that back out there because I think we have to think beyond just this vote.
Very good points. I'm trying to internalize here and who I might want to have, I mean, from what I hear, it sounds like how long it took us to finally come up with the long-term strategy at the west end. What we did over almost 20 years is not what we need to or want to be doing at the east end. So we need to compress that, right? So,
It sounds like.
right, so,
Maybe the engineers want to pipe in here.
right,
And add their opinion to it. It's
Yeah.
my opinion that the village and the club have to work very quickly to figure out, are we as an entity going to continue to try and save that beach as it is now, or rebuild it? Or do we need to work together to say what's a better utilization? And does different action have to get initiated? That's my.
Eric, want to see if you might have some thoughts on that?
Well, I tend to agree. The sand placement, if we're allowed to do that on the east end, the probability of its longevity is not good. It could easily be going in 2 to 3 years. It's almost to some degree an experiment based on the condition of the frying pan shoals at this juncture. which controls everything that goes on seaward of the Shoals Club. The last time sand was placed all the way down to the end of the island there was during the construction of the navigation project in 2000. That sand was beneficial, but it was a large quantity, and the condition of the beach and the condition of Jaybird Shoals was different at that time. I would agree that based on the performance of what happens after you place 500,000 cubic yards strategically there, let's say, ideally, with the next project, probably will, to a large degree, dictate or could control what you do in the future. You will then have to make the decision as to whether or not it's cost effective to continue to do that, either through federal disposal projects, which still will cost you money to do, or projects of your own. The big challenge there is being able to build some type of stabilizing structures, which legislatively is prohibited at this point in time. Your legal counsel has formulated some very interesting legislation and is ready to propose that. If that were to occur, that then gives you an option to stabilize that end of the island, which the probability of trying to do that with some low-level terminal groin, which would be much lower, much smaller than what you see at the west end. But the probability of impounding sand strategically down there to the benefit of the club would then be on the table. But at this point in time, it is not on the table. So your only option is to reevaluate the performance of beach fill alone, and then probably make a fiscal and political decision as to how to go forward in the future.
So it sounds like we have like a 2-year plus window within which a decision and action needs to be taken. And I just want to make that obvious, because those of us who love our Shoals Club and love the island and want to see us continue, recognize there's a much bigger thing coming. We need to know what it is and how to pay for it. And my next question was sort of related to that. In approving these bonds and taking these steps, we've had some projects in need since Hurricane Florence. Things like, our grinder pumps being at their usable age limit and things like that, things that we've heard about as a result of the whole Hurricane Florence task force. Does making these investments and placing us at this tax level impact our ability, from your vantage point, of what funds will become available to do some of these other infrastructure projects that have been sitting?
So I could, specific to lift stations, that's a refurbishment program. It was never, quote, put off. There's things that are set out there that are not correct things. So I just want to add that for clarity. And those programs are part of the utility fund or the enterprise fund, which is completely separate of the general fund that would be funding the debt associated with the shoreline management programs. Having said, yeah, there are probably some things that, we've had to delay. I mean, even back in 2007, when we did that, we did it the very first design of a village hall expansion. And here we are in 2024, and there's 11 or 12 of us crammed in there like sardines. But we're making do, but things like that, I would say, yeah, there are probably some things that.
So I have one wrap up to go with this,
Yeah.
and that is that I like coming to the meetings, hearing what's going on. One of the things that I think is not understood by property owners is, could we get a better view of all of the projects that have, even the village hall project, things that have been brought forward, saying we want to do this, we want to do this, and they're all sitting in my brain, but I'm thinking, our budget is so crammed and we're now looking at a tax increase. How are we gonna do all these things? I don't think. And I remember sitting in one of the village council meetings where Jerry was responding to questions. And he was saying, well, we've got that in a certain fund, or, you know, we've got that on our plan. We don't know what we have planned. In a layperson's, you know, as opposed to, you know, when you're looking at the budget or something, we figured it out. But, you know, there have been a number of major investments voiced for this island over a period of time. And we don't necessarily see them all getting addressed. We don't understand, are they still on the docket? Do you have funding plan for them? Is there going to be implications? So as an aside, it would really be helpful for the property owners to get a better appreciation for how you do your budgeting and what is facing us. That's my speech.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say we probably have done a better job, and we actually have a webpage dedicated to it, which is ongoing projects. Yeah. It's a description of ongoing projects. And Karen maintains that with routine updates. Probably what we can improve upon, however, is the things that perhaps you mentioned that have been put to the wayside. We did that as part of the budget formulation process, and we've shown that there, but we didn't, it's just there, and someone would have to go dive deep into the weeds of it.
We can't be,
Right, so we could show things like that.
because that's also formulating in our brains in terms of, okay, we've got some things that have been delayed and we suspect they'll come up again. So how are we gonna manage all this budgetarily? And you may already have that thought through, but
Yeah.
we don't know.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention is even there was a lot of discussion on that at the most recent retreat. And our efforts with the asset inventory assessment grants that we got, that's $500,000 that we're working to formulate our capital improvement programs and plans that will document and codify all that. So there is a place that you can see that comprehensively that we can certainly share, but that's a process that is ongoing, and we will definitely look to share details of that with folks that may help.
Scott has his hand raised.
Okay,
I also want to let everybody know the entire retreat is on our YouTube channel by subject. That one you just mentioned about our AIA and the capital improvement plan would really get people up to speed on a lot of stuff.
yeah. All right,
Scott?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So back to the questioner's earlier question about, the likelihood of the sand, how long is it going to stay on the beach? What happens after we lose that sand going forward? And I think, Chris, we've talked about, once this sand is played, if we're successful at getting the $4.5 million bond approved, and if we're successful at getting sand placed down there, that's going to be in 2025. The next time the village will fund one of its projects is going to be in the 2032 to 2033 range. And so it's between 2025 and 2032, 33 that we're going to conduct the studies, that we're going to hopefully get the soft growing and terminal growing legislation passed. Hopefully we're going to get frying pan shoals, borrow site approved. There's a lot of things to happen. But keep in mind that the other thing we're working on is this agreement with the Corps of Engineers to place sand where it is needed most. And so when in years 2027 and years 2029, we are hopeful that we'll be able to work with the Corps and have some sand placed down on the east end to help us get to the 2032, 2033 range when we could fund terminal growing and soft or soft growing type engineering solutions out on the east end. Does that make sense? Am I right about that, Chris, Eric?
Yeah, I think definitely with regards to the Frying Pan Shoal long-term borrow site that we worked through that process as we've discussed. Once we getting the permits to do this last dredging of Jaber Shoal, that we would reinitiate that permit review for Frying Pan Shoal. We are working diligently with the Corps on the memorandum of agreement for additional work where we can have the Corps place that sand where it is most needed at some delta cost paid by the village. And in addition to, if council and working with our engineer, with Eric, makes the decision to take the next steps from conceptual design to more detailed design of a structure, assuming that we can also get the legislation passed to allow those to be permitted, that all would take place. It's,
Yeah. Going back to your question, what happens next? I mean, it's basically, so this is, if the engineer's telling me that the sand might not last more than 2.5 years. Well, then what happens? And I think when Chris put up the one slide that I asked him to put up, and with the red line going up and the zigzags, this is my perception of what's going on. Is like, we are looking, this whole bond question is making a commitment that, yes, the approach that we're taking to the beach, we're going to have to be investing in this thing forever, just like we are in West Beach and just like we are in South Beach. And so the question is, do you do this and try and buy time so that the issues that Scott was bringing up, that those might come to fruition, and then the cost of continuing to invest in the east end of South Beach. I was, well, it's not, the big chunk that we always thought, if we don't have terminal groins, et cetera, it won't be the big chunk. And so you have to look at it from, at least I look at it from a very long range point of view, that right now we're buying time, and yeah, that sand's going to disappear. And in 2 years, when the Corps of Engineers are planning their next dredging project, the question's going to come up is, well, do we have to throw a little bit of money so they run the pipes down? So we're addressing the issue again in 2.5 years, 3 years. And for a while, and so the whole bond issue is, in everybody's mind is like, what is the risk? And is the risk, Zach had all his numbers. To me, it's like, well, what is the risk? Well, the risk is, for my house, it's $500 a year increase of taxes. Am I willing to do that maybe forever? At least for the next 6 years, that's the effect of the bond. But, in 3 years, maybe there's another chunk of change that I'm going to have to throw into it. And where's my threshold of pain?
Yeah, I think the difference between the South Beach and the East End is obviously that we can manage to go 6 years and fill in, and we haven't had an income tax.
But that's only possible because of what we did. And so where we are right now is we're going, because, well, we have to do that down. I think the logic with Eric is that we're going to have to do that down here too, to have something that actually works. And in the meantime, what do? Well, you either step back and let nature do whatever it's going to do. And hopefully when we do get funds and approvals to do something else, that we respond and maybe do some, retroactive. So I don't know what we're going to be looking at. And the question is, do we look at the risk of the bond and look at, Eric, is what the plan right now is, well, you have a better idea of what you're going to be looking at in 2 years, or you're going to have a better idea in 3 years.
You're not twisting what I'm suggesting. I'm in no way suggesting not to do this.
Oh, me neither. I'm not suggesting we do it either. No.
For the amount of time it has taken us to understand a solution that is doable on one side, we know we've got some other challenges right ahead of us. And I'm just suggesting that there needs to be a different solution than you pay for it over 6 years, but it's gone in 2 years, because then in 3 years, we gotta do it over again. It just stacks up. There's gotta be a better solution. It may also be that it's not beach remergement. It may be, we have to think as an island about changing how we use that side of the island. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, and I think the other part of your question is, what are you deferring by doing this?
Mhm.
What are we deferring by doing this project? And, you know, yeah. Well, it's, you know, that's always, it's a horrible few weeks when we're going through the budget. And I mean, we went through this last year. They're just like, can't do that, can't do this. You know, you're breaking down, how do you meet your budget? And what do you have to put off? You have to put off Village Hall. We had to put off some paving that we might have done. And, you know, it's not, it's a prioritization, you know, so if you're saying, well, would we have to put off paving for another year? And is that more important than keeping the beach going? You know, it's, yeah, it's tough. Yeah.
Rex?
Oh, you don't have questions, do you, Rex?
No, I'm gonna step up because I'm a little soft spoken.
Yeah,
I only have about 42 questions.
okay, good, good.
I'll ask them all. But it does point to one of the problems that I've had with this whole process, which is, you know, I think now we're getting to the truth of the matter, which is that we're really talking about a long-term project. At times, this has been presented as, oh no, all we're thinking about is this one renourishment that will cost X amount. And that's what we're talking about. But we're really talking about a long-term project of highly uncertain cost. And this is really the first time that that has come out, frankly. One of the problems of our process on the island here is that we don't really have a way to debate issues. The questions and doubts about what we should do at the East End have never had a forum in which they could be presented. We've had excellent presentations about the concept of the project, but we've had no presentations about the cons, about the questions, about the doubts, about the differences between the East and the West End. For example, I mean, there's sort of a false equivalence in this whole presentation. The point is just like the West End. It's obviously not. The dynamics there are totally different. It's shaped by nature at the point. It's shaped largely by the shipping channel at the West End. That's the rationale for the legislature approving the terminal groin there, is that there's a navigation channel right next to the beach that's contributing to the erosion. There's no justification like that at the East End. And I think the terminal groin is going to be a heavy lift. And frankly, there are conservation interests that would oppose any kind of hardened structure at the point. We go along with it because it was next to a navigation channel and it kept our island from sliding into a man-made problem. But what's the issue at the East End? Similarly, the infrastructure, the public infrastructure that's at risk, no question about it, along the whole of South Bulkhead line, at the club, road, utilities, etc. Where is that public infrastructure on the East End? It isn't there. At this point, it's far back from the eroding beach. So there are significant differences between the two. There are differences in how far they are from the borrow site and the cost of King Sand. And that really hasn't been had a forum for being presented, except in the sort of weak form of questions. So we don't have a capacity for civic debate, I think is the point I'm trying to make. So the other thing is that we haven't really had any financial modeling of what the cost of this long-term program will be. It will not be costless in years 2 and 4 because we'll have to pay the Corps if we have a core agreement. If we don't have a core agreement, we'll be trying to find a borrow site and doing our own project at full cost to the village, not a marginal cost. And so the sorting through, there's a financial way for financial analysts to look at uncertainty in the future and the costs of different scenarios. If we get the core agreement, that's one cost. If we get not Jaybird, but Frying Pan Shoals as a borrow area, that changes costs somewhat, although it's still expensive to get it from. If we get legislation for a terminal groin, we still have to afford an every 2-year program with quality sand to maintain that terminal groin. What's the cost of that going to be? It's not complete unknown. We can't throw up our hands and say, well, we don't know, there are too many uncertainties. There's a way to analyze uncertainty and to cost that out. And I would just say that we haven't done that up to this point, but we better do it in the next 2 years so that we can actually have a meaningful discussion of this. That was more. I guess the last one was sort of a question. Have we done any long-term modeling of the cost under different scenarios?
We haven't, as far as I know. No. And you're right, though, in terms of what do you do, what happens next and how much is it going to cost? And what are we going to defer to get that cost? Yeah. And there's a lot of variables, you know, in terms of Frying Pan Shoals, approval of terminal groin, the MOA with the Corps of Engineers. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, every one of those things have huge impact on what the costs will be.
And we're going to assign probabilities to each of those, you know, they're
Right.
estimates, but they're still probabilities that can help you think through a long-term question of what we can afford.
Yeah. I think in terms of further response, I mean, all of those things are all being combination studied on one level and being pushed on a legislative level. And so it's not like, well, in 2 years, we'll shrug our shoulders and say we don't. I mean, those things are all kind of in process. And I think what you're asking is like, well, that's great. If you approve this bond, boy, I hope in 2 years, it's not, I'm not sitting here saying it's in process, that it's actually, we know what's going to happen next. And you're right.
But also that there's a way on the island to debate whether there should be a terminal groin. Because there are conservation interests that would say, absolutely not. The point should be left in its natural state. It's one of the wild places. It's a complicated hydrodynamic process out there. It's been one of the joys that we've appreciated over the years. Maybe that's the way it should stay. I don't know. But at least that question should be in the mix as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Rex. Karen, did you say you had someone that had a comment, or was there a question that was up there? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
I think that's it. Scott, you're,
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, so I know we're not supposed to be, I want to be careful that I don't overstep what we're supposed to be doing here. We're supposed to be informing, we're supposed to be educating. We can't advocate or promote. So I'm finding it very hard to find the right words of what to say at this point, but I'm going to give a stab at it. Rex, in regards to this, all is new about looking for a long-term solution on the East End. We talked about this at the February 22 retreat and the February 23 retreat. I spoke at least as early as the September, October meeting of 2023 about the fact that we have been taxing people all over the island and in MSD A and B to protect the beaches of Bald Head Island. But in fact, we've only protected 60% of the beaches. And so there are people that have been paying in and not getting benefit for what they've been paying. at a time when the properties on the east end, you know, are seeing erosion and the threat is there. What we're trying to do is take a good hard look at, is there something we can do about it? And if there is, then what steps should we take to do what we can? We know that there's going to be some hard pulls ahead. We know that there's some conservation interest against any sort of structure along any coastline. And we know that there will be conservation interest against structure or structures at the point of Cape Fear. At the same time, we know that there are a lot of interests that want to see the economic interests of the island protected, and want to see if there's a reasonable approach that can be implemented over time at a reasonable cost, that we may be able to protect all our beaches, much like we've been able to do on the west end. Now, is it going to cost money over the long term? Of course it is, just like it's cost money to do the west end of the project. But my belief is that with the right engineered solutions, that much like we're finding that we've slowed the movement of sand on the west end to a good degree and have benefited the Corps and the state port because of that effort, that we can find ourselves with the proper engineering solution long term that hopefully will help Mother Nature slow the movement of sand enough that this is an affordable and doable long-term solution for all of our beaches.
All right. Karen, you, just to reaffirm, you said the question that had been in the chat is no longer there?
Oh, it is. I'm sorry, we forgot about that one.
Okay.
It's on the screen.
All right. So please confirm scenario A equals no tax increase. Also in scenario B, are those tax increases indefinite, or will there be a subsequent reduction in taxes once bonds paid off? So Zach, I think you can confirm scenario A.
Yep.
And then as far as B, just a comment that our shoreline management program with regards to our private placement projects, we strategically funded them to pay the debt back and so that we had one project paid off before we took on the next one. Or at most, we might have been paying interest only for a brief period before we paid that previous bond off in full and took on the full debt with principal and interest of the next project. And that's sort of been and would continue to happen. So to suggest that the tax increases are indefinite, or will there be some subsequent reduction? I don't know that.
So I would say it's the typical, it depends, right? So at that moment in time, when you're talking about the timeline of projects, what the cost of the next project comes in. And so in theory, in scenario B, those tax increases fund this GO bond. So when you pay that off and you have a next project come in, those respective tax rates at that time are going to be for that project.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So it depends.
Right.
Let me first put a disclaimer out there. I live on South. I pay tax. I pay higher tax. Chris, you and I have had discussions about that higher tax and what I get for it. And it hadn't been a lot. And I speak a little bit for my neighbors too, because see, they're not voting members here. They're not registered to vote here. They're also paying. You got 5 or 6 little neighbors around me that are not voting members. But what I can say, and I know I'm not an engineer, so I don't take this. You make a lot of sense on your things. I only can tell you what I've seen. And we haven't had a lot of sand come up our way past Kilgore Ridge. And this is the one that came, and correct me if I'm wrong, was back in 2018, I think. It actually came up past us.
Yeah.
And I can tell you the change, having lived here, we were seeing some pretty serious erosion there with both the beach and the dunes. And ever since we've done that one, we haven't, I don't believe we ever got one past Hillbury Bridge since then. But the buildup from the dunes, if you go there now, people, I'm lucky, I'm a reverse floor plan, I could still see the ocean, but those people can't see the ocean. Our beach access, they just had to build another, this is the second or third time you guys had to build steps over. And so we've seen a benefit, okay, from that. Whatever one we paid for, the 15 million, however we paid for it, I don't know the numbers, but you know, I don't know what's gonna happen if we don't get sand. I'm gonna be impacted. Now, I don't know if that means all of us petition the village to take away that tax increase that I'm paying for. Because what I'm told is, I get that tax increase because not only because we're doing it to protect your home, but the beaches are public and everybody's got to share. I said, well, if the beaches are public and everybody's got to share, well, let's raise everybody's taxes. Why should I be paying for everybody else on the island to enjoy the beach? Well, because you get protection. Well, I don't get protection. I'm not going to get protection if I don't get this vote. So unless the council is going to tell me that we're going to reduce, not just me as an owner and a resident here, voting residents, on behalf of all of my non-voting residents, think about reducing their taxes and sharing it amongst the whole island. And that's all I would ask you to consider, because I look at what the benefit can be and what this cost is, and I'm not gonna sit here and I understand people live on budgets, people have certain amounts and they have to do it, and I respect that, okay? But what I will also tell you is, you know, the most important asset we have in our lives is time. We can't buy more of that. But here, to maybe try to fix or come up with some solutions, we can buy a little bit of time here. We can buy an asset, we can buy that time. And, you know, I don't know if I'm supposed to be a proponent or not, but I'm a proponent of saying, let's spend that money. I totally agree with Rex and everyone else that we need a group to get together, whether that's club, the village, BHA, whoever it is, to really say, okay, 2 years, 3 years, we may have to make some really tough decisions, but what's the plan? And start working on it. But, you know, we can buy ourselves some time and we do see some impact. I don't know whether extending all the way down to the Schultz Club is going to impact those homes along the way down there. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. But I think we owe it to our residents along there and the people that have been paying these taxes the opportunity to say, let's come up with a long-term solution. And I don't know what it is. I agree. It's a long shot to get a permitting point. It's a long shot that you're going to let us dredge on something that may have shipwrecks. But it allows us to put a plan together as a group to figure out what that solution is. The club has taken early steps to start looking at maybe long-term solutions already. The village probably has some ideas. I'm not going to speak for the BHA because I don't know it, but you know, just like we attack stormwater, just like we put a Florence post-op, I would support buying time to support an asset that's pretty valuable to us on the island. Those are just my comments. Appreciate you listening.
Any other questions? Karen, any on the chat?
No, sir.
All right, Mayor, if you want to wrap any?
Yeah, I
Final
do,
thoughts?
but I'm
Wrap.
afraid to.
Yeah, I mean,
I find myself in the same position as Scott. I mean, there's, you know, when you're looking at this, it's a question of risk And, you know, when I'm juggling whether the risk is worth it or not, I think Chris's presentation, going back to, here's what we've been doing. There's always risk doing what we were doing, and the engineered beach was a good solution, and we're all benefiting from that. And, you know, do you continue that philosophy and say, look, I want to keep on looking for solutions?
Yeah.
And I think that's what, you know, that's the question, you know, when you're looking at the bond, whether you're going to support the bond or not, you know, at least me personally, that's how I look at it. You know, and obviously, you know, when you're looking for solutions, you know, the things Rex pointed out, yeah, we have to look for solutions, or we have to shrug our shoulders and say, none of these solutions are going to work, but we have to have the time to do it.
Okay.
And so, I mean, the only comment, do this seriously, you know, and talk to your friend, people who aren't listening, who aren't here. You know, this is a real serious issue. And so discuss it, you know, and don't not vote. Because we need to know. Okay.
All right. Well,
Thank you for having this second session.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for coming. All right, everybody have a rest of your day. Good day. Okay.